Hello, good morning. I'm really glad you could all join us today. Welcome to this Deep Secure webinar, and to this session in particular, where we're going to be looking at how you can safely exchange information between trusted and untrusted domains. A couple of little housekeeping points, if you will. I hope you all see you've got a chat window there in which you can ask questions. Myself and the rest of the team from Deep Secure will be keeping an eye on the chat window as we go along, so feel free to post your queries there, and we'll try and answer them as we go. And if not, then we'll batch them up and have a little session at the end where we go through your questions and feedback. Okay, so my name's John Stevenson, and with me today is Tim Freeston, Principal Solutions Architect at Deep Secure. And in this webinar, we're going to have a look at the cross-domain security. Our focus is going to be looking at how you can safely exchange data between trusted and untrusted domains. Now, there's some good news here in that there is some best practice recommendations. So some official guidance, if you will, for addressing the issue of cross-domain security and data exchange between trusted and untrusted. So we'll start by having a look at them and how Deep Secure has made it possible for organizations who want to implement that best practice to do so practically and cost effectively. So the webinar is going to be broken up into two main sections, and the first one is looking at data import. So that's bringing data in from untrusted into trusted. And we'll look at how Deep Secure solutions map directly to that best practice recommendations, guidance. And then we've got a demo. So Tim, what is it you're going to show us with the demonstration?
So on the demo, we'll show stopping some malware coming in, just using some of the technology that we have, and B, applying some policy to the inbound, in this case emails, just to make sure that we only import the sort of data that we want to import.
Fantastic stuff, great. And second part of our session today then is going to be looking at the same issue, but with regard to data export. So that's data moving from trusted to untrusted. And again, we'll look at how you can use Deep Secure solutions to build that kind of cross-domain security, and how those components map directly to the best practice recommendations. And Tim, I think we've got another demonstration again then, haven't we?
Yep, so this is going the other way, so sending data out and making sure that you only export the sort of data that you want to export, and making sure that it's safe to export. So that'll be demonstrating that with both emails and file transfers. Great
stuff. And of course, we'll close the session then, have an opportunity for questions and pointers to some additional resources. Okay, so many organizations have networks that contain sensitive information or run critical processes alongside other networks that are used by people not trusted to handle that information or not qualified to operate those processes. The fundamental business issue is that there's usually a need for exchanging some information between these networks to ensure business continuity. There's some classic examples, reporting from an industrial control network, for example, or bringing in unclassified information but into a classified network in order to work on it. Now, keeping these two domains separate is good for security, but unfortunately it's bad for business. Combining them would be great for business, but the extra controls that you would need to protect the sensitive information or the processes just make that impractical. So what's key here is to get information into a network without importing malware, and to get information out of a network without leaking any sensitive data. That's the conundrum, that's the challenge we face. And there've been attempts to try and address this in various ways down the years, starting, I suppose, with the most obvious one, which is a physical air gap. So what does that mean? It means no electronic connection So great, no danger of importing malware. The user switches between desktops, copy types information from one screen to the other. It's really good for security, but of course it's inefficient, error prone, not good for business at all. So, if we take the principle of the air gap on the stage and look at an electronic air gap now, so here we copy the data that we want to exchange between the domains onto removable media and carry it between the networks. Okay, that sounds all right, but the media can carry malware, and equally the media could end up with sensitive information on it being carried out to an external network. So in fact, the electronic air gap is bad for security, as well as being inefficient and not that good for business either. The third approach, and the one we're focusing on today, is a cross-domain solution. And what that does is allows the connection of the networks, allowing the information to flow, but in a controlled way. And for it to work properly, it has to be secure against attack itself, and built therefore to stand up to some kind of independent verification, that it offers the right level of assurance. And that's the key part, this independent verification part, because it makes it different than what you do if you were just using mainstream commercial gateways. The owners need independent assurance that the security provided is equivalent to physical separation. To make this possible, cross-domain solution has to be built in a way that makes analysis straightforward, practical, and affordable. Now, there's typically two types of cross-domain solution. There's transfer, where the data moves between the domains, and access, where the user effectively sort of reaches out across the domain in order to access some data. But they're fundamentally the same thing. They just tend to use different protocols. And building a cross-domain solution can seem like quite a big challenge, quite daunting, you could almost say. And one of the things that people will often want to start with is what's the best practice advice? What's the best practice advice? Where can I turn for assistance? And here in the UK, and it will be the same in most countries, I suspect, there's an organisation that's there to provide that best practice advice, and in here it's the National Cyber Security Centre, or NCSC. They looked at the problem of safe data import and export between domains. They developed an architectural pattern for how to deal with these challenges effectively. The patterns are publicly available. Any organisation can view them and see how they could be used to protect critical or sensitive networks. You can see the URLs to them here on the screen at the moment. Right down in the footer there are the public URLs. They're called the NCSC guidance patterns for data import and data export, and you can look them up online. And what they do is they describe a number of controls to handle the data safely. And it's these that we're going to look at it in some detail in this webinar. But in summary here, you'll see them in the top line of blue icons stretching from left to right, those representing the controls that are needed if you're going to import data from an untrusted into a trusted domain. And then under that, you'll see a set of blue icons running from right to left, representing the recommended controls to apply if you're going to export data safely from trusted to untrusted. So these architectural patterns and these sets of controls represent, if you will, kind of the best place to start. But building a cross-domain solution is still quite a challenging exercise. And one of the first places to start, if you're going to try and achieve it, is to figure out how you're going to implement these controls. We're going to break down the challenge by looking first of all at one set of architectural patterns, which is the patterns for import. And the fundamental issue with safe data import is the risk that you might import malware from untrusted into trusted. So to see how Deep Secure approaches this and how Deep Secure solutions can mitigate the threat, mapping directly to the best practice, I'm going to hand you over now to Tim.
Thanks, John. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen. When it comes to stopping malware, which is the key problem here when you're trying to do safe data import, there's a couple of different approaches you can take. So one is to scrutinize the data to see if it contains anything bad. But this is actually quite difficult, especially when you're dealing with complex data formats, the sort that are exchanged today. It requires actually some complex software to go and check that data. And the problem with complex software is that'll inevitably have flaws in it, and so it could go wrong. So you could end up missing the malware, or it could be exploited by an attacker to turn off those checks. So to get around this, you can run multiple checkers just in case one or more goes wrong. But as John was saying, for a cross-domain solution, you need some independent validation that the solution's working correctly. You need to show that those checkers can't be bypassed. To do that, you could arrange the checkers in a pipeline, so it has to go through each one before it can get to the next stage, and then before it finally gets imported. The other thing you need to do is show that those checkers are all independent of each other, because there's no point in using the same checker more than once. And this is more difficult since the different implementations can often use the same libraries underneath the hood, and developers developing those checkers can make the same mistakes. So actually getting independence is quite difficult. An alternative approach to checking is to normalize the data. So that is to build a brand new copy of the data from the information inside it. But again, to get that information requires the same sort of complex software. So that again could contain flaws. In this case though, rather than running multiple independent checkers, you can split the extract of the information stage to the building of the new data stage and put a simple interface between the two to carry the data. And then any flaws with the extract software can't be exploited by the build stage. You still want to independently verify that that defense can't be bypassed. So again, you can have this pipeline of extract and then build. You can't do the build before you do the extract. And if the extract goes wrong, the data doesn't get to the build. And additionally, you in this case, you want to be able to show that that extract worked okay. That's the bit that could be vulnerable to complex software. And in this case, it's a case of verifying that simple data interface between the two stages. And because it's simple data, you can actually do that in hardware logic. And that gives you a non-bypassable verified data structure to build from. So the UK pattern, the safe import pattern, describes some controls for handling importing data. And the first one of those is to transform complex data. And that's, as I said, because you can't reliably verify complex data. You can transform it into something that's a lot simpler, then you can start to verify it. At Deep Secure, our IX appliance implements the normalization approach that I just mentioned, so extract, verify, and build. The first stage of this is to extract the information from the data. And you do this by transforming it into a set of really simple data structures. And those data structures are defined to hold the expected information, but nothing more. So the original data is left behind and only the valid business information is extracted. And we place that into an intermediate format that we call XDS, or extensible data structure. An XDS is designed to be simple to validate, even in hardware logic. As I said before, the extract phase is handling complex software from untrusted locations, and so we have to assume that that part of it could have flaws and could be exploited, and that's why there are the following controls. So systems can be attacked using network and transport and application protocols that are carrying the data. So terminating these protocols at the entrance to the gateway and just carrying the data with simple protocols can stop that sort of attack. So here the IX appliance, the Deep Secure appliance, proxies the data and terminates those complex protocols. And it only has, as a result of the transformation as well, it has simple data and now simple protocol information as well to carry the data and the protocol forward. And in the same way that the data has been transformed, any malformed or additional information in the protocol is also left behind because there's no room for it in the XDS. Attackers often use a path back to the untrusted network if they're exfiltrating data or performing command and control with some malware. So ensuring only the expected data is flowing in the expected direction can help prevent an attacker using the gateway for that sort of attack. And the Deep Secure IX appliance uses a hardware-only device to enforce that flow control. So the simplified data that we've created and the protocol information that's carried in the XDS is passed in one direction across that device, preventing an attacker from exfiltrating data using this channel. Any compromise of that sending side of the gateway, so we know that handling complex software from untrusted sources, that could be indicated by changes in the protocol passing across the device. So monitoring and reporting of the integrity of that connection can help identify that sort of attack. And here in the IX appliance, the hardware logic makes sure the protocol is being followed, and any failures in that hardware logic or any failures in the validation using the hardware logic cause the data stream to be dropped and the system gets alerted. Once we're through the hardware logic, the simplified data and protocols can be terminated, and the data is then carried on using new connections established on the trusted side of the gateway. And then the final stage is verify. So the data that's carried to the destination needs to be verified to be correct. And the verification needs to be reliable and assured. And that's really made possible using this simplified data structures as a result of the transformation. So there are two types of validation that you can do. One is syntactic to make sure the data structures are correct, and the other is semantic to make sure that the meaning of the data is valid. And in the IX appliance, we do that validation in three places. The first is during the extract phase, as we convert the data to XDS. Now we know that that could be attacked because it's on the low side, but it does provide an early stop point, and that's validating the semantics of the data and building that XDS, those XDS structures. The second place, and the key one really, is in the hardware logic that's validating the syntax of the data that's been created. So here, the FPGAs that are trustworthy are validating that the extract has done its job correctly and hasn't been attacked. And then the third and final one is part of the build phase. As it builds brand new data back to sort of complex data from simple data, again, it's validating the semantics of that data to make sure it's correct. So the IX appliance maps onto the NCSE guidance using that three-stage approach, with physical hardware providing the high assurance for cross-domain import. So this device supports two-way protocols, so things like SMTP and HTTP. And because it's two-way, it can be used for data export use cases as well as import. Now then, the Deep Secure policy enforcement guards can wrap around that threat removal appliance, the IX appliance, and provide additional controls on the import of data. So the guards perform deep content inspection of the traffic. They're looking deep inside the traffic, and they do things like support authentication with the source and destination systems, and then apply policy based on what is found inside the content, as well as who it's coming from and who it's going to. And the guards can also do things like audit and journal of the content that's being passed. So let's do a demo of the import. So here I've got a protected network connected to an external network. And in this case, I'm going to show email coming in via the cross-domain solution. So the first thing that the email will do is hit the IX appliance, and that will do the threat removal, the extract, verify, build approach on the email and all of the attachments. And then the mail guard will apply policy based on the inbound content. So let's switch to the demo environment, and as you'll see, I've got a red network, which is my protected network, and a blue network, which is the low side, the unprotected side. So here I've got a user on the outside called Bob, and he's going to try and send a message, in this case a malicious message, to Alice on the inside. And if we have a look at the message, with a bit of social engineering, we can attach a file to the email and send that in to Alice. And if we have a look at this file, we'll see that it's a Word document, and it's got some macros in it which are going to cause some malware to run. So if I can get Alice just to do enable editing and enable content, then we get the malware that runs, and in this case it's a bit of ransomware, and it encrypts everything on your disk. So not a very nice piece of malware. Fortunately, I can get out of this one. So I'm going to send that through to Alice from Bob, and as I say, the wording hopefully in the email will persuade Alice to open the attachment and get her to run the malware. So you can see here the message has arrived. That's been through the cross-domain solution, so that's been through the IX appliance, which has done the threat removal, and it's been through the policy enforcement. And we can see here that as I open the attachment, it has now been made safe by the cross-domain solution, by the IX appliance. The extract of the information has extracted the key business information from the document. So I still have what looks exactly the same as the original document, but it's without the malware inside. And it's left the malware behind, not because it found the malware, it didn't spot the malware in there. All it did was take the business information, put that into XDS, and then create a brand new document from that XDS. And in doing so, it's that because there's no room for where the malware is, it gets left behind. So the second demonstration for import is about the policy enforcement. So as well as threat removal, we've got the policy enforcement engine. And so here we're going to show sending a message in, which is, in this case, it's ITAR restricted export controlled. So here I've got a document, and if I open that document, we'll see that it's actually marked as subject to export controls. And there's a marking here at the top of the document, but there are also markings inside the metadata that detail exactly how it's marked and therefore how it should be handled. So here we have a security marking. And that means that only certain people are allowed to access or use this, open this document and read it. And so we have to have very strict policy to determine who's allowed to receive what sort of documents. And so if I send this message in, it will again go through the threat removal process, and the threat removal process will make sure that what would get through is safe, but then it goes into the policy enforcement process. And that's checking the security markings and checking the sender and the recipient and making sure that that person can receive that sort of content from this person. And in this case, you can see that they can't. So Alice isn't cleared to see those classification levels or those export control marking documents, and therefore Bob gets a non-delivery report back to say he can't send that one in. So that's both policy enforcement and threat removal working together to protect the import of data into an organization. So let's go back to the presentation. And we'll move on to safe data export. So as well as the pattern for safe import, the NCSC has defined controls for safely exporting data from a network as well. So here, when exporting data, your main concern is data leakage caused by things like user error or software errors, or malicious insiders, or malware actually residing already in the protected network. And controls for export need to fit with the way that the users work, and that will vary in different organizations, but some of the techniques include things like manual review, where a responsible person has to check the data manually before approving the release. And in doing this, that approval needs to be audited as well. And part of the defense is ensuring the approval has taken place before release. To ensure that, things like workflows can be built to make sure a review takes place. And for additional assurance, you could sign the data by the reviewer and only release it once that signature has been verified. But manual review can't be relied on to spot everything in the content. It's not necessarily feasible to fully check large, complex documents. So this is where automatic review can help with things like DLP tools to search for specific content that shouldn't be present if you're going to release the document or release the content. And the main difference here with commercial DLP tools is some of the complex protective markings that you might need. So these can appear in multiple locations in files and use different encodings and have complexities such as restrictive and permissive markings that need to be understood to determine whether the data can go out or not. And all of this has to be done on the content and any embedded data as well that's inside it. And then finally, there are places that can be used in files that won't be seen by either a manual review or an automatic review. So most file formats have redundant data structures where additional data can be hidden without affecting the way the file looks. Steganography is a technique of hiding data in legitimate data, and it's often applied to images. encoding information in the pixels of an image. This sort of data you can't spot by human review, and automated review mostly can't catch it either, meaning a different approach is needed. So in the same way as for data import, you can use normalization to remove the redundancy in data files and ensure only the expected data is carried to the outside. So moving on to the pattern, the first element in the pattern is normalizing or sanitizing the data, as I just mentioned. And that's making sure that it removes any data that shouldn't be in there, that's hidden in unused areas of the document, and stuff that won't be picked up by a manual review or any automated tools. So the IX appliance that we looked at before that does data import can perform this same role using the same extract, verify, build process. Any information in those redundant data structures isn't carried forward, and information hidden in the pixels of images using steganography is normalized sufficiently so that it's disrupted, so it doesn't get through. Authorized release is about making sure the content is suitable for release. So manual reviews can be built into the workflow, and automated reviews can be used to check for specific markings and keywords or phrases. So the Deep Secure Policy Enforcement Guard, that can hold emails for manual review if that's required, and review and release based on who the sender is and who the recipients are if needed. And for file transfer, you can build a manual review and release workflow where a reviewer gets to download and look at a file before it can be released across the cross-domain solution. To make sure data is only released once it's been reviewed, you can use signatures where the reviewer signs the data and the release control mechanism checks the signature and removes it before release. But there are alternative mechanisms that you can use as well, such as authenticating the sending side to the release so that only authenticated applications can release the data. So Deep Secure IX supports mutual authentication with the applications that talk to it so that only trusted authenticated entities can send it data for export. And the policy enforcement guards can be used around that to make sure only specific users are allowed to send data to the IX appliance. Encryption is another control, and that ensures that the data is kept confidential until it reaches the destination. So here the IX appliance and the policy enforcement guards both can use TLS to make sure the channel is encrypted to the destination. And for email, the policy enforcement guards can also do S/MIME encryption. So release control is making sure that the release has been authorized using one or more of those mechanisms that we described, things like signing, channel authentication, and user authentication. So here the IX appliance is authenticating those calling applications to make sure the data can be released. In the same way as data import, it's important to make sure that this channel that's being used to export data isn't used by an attacker. In this case, we're trying to stop the attacker from using the channel to import any malware. So again, the IX appliance using that same device as used for import means that any import through this channel undergoes that same extract, verify, build process. So it can't be used to import any malware. It only gets the expected data, things like acknowledgements of receipt of the data get imported. And then finally, the data can be passed to the destination. So an external facing proxy delivers the data to the destination, meaning that you don't have a direct connection into your protected network. So IX appliance and the policy enforcement guards provide those external proxies for SMTP, HTTP, and file transfer. Again, as for data import, those controls can be augmented with additional controls using the policy enforcement guards. So again, policy enforcement looking at the content and determining whether stuff can go out based on source and destination and the content of that data, and then adding journaling and auditing to what's going out as well. So let's do a demonstration of the export. So again, I've got the same setup as before, a protected network connected to an external network. And in this case, I'm going to show an email going out via the cross-domain solution and file transfer going through the manual review process. So the IX appliance is there to remove any hidden data from the content, and the policy enforcement guards are applying policy to the outgoing transfers. So this time we're going to start at Alice on the inside, and Alice is going to want to send a document out. And first of all, she'll try sending one out via file transfer. So here there's an application that Alice can use, our PX web application. So I've logged in as Charlie there rather than Alice. Let's just log back out again, log in as the right user. So Alice has got an application. It's a very simple drag and drop application. She can drop files onto here, or she can choose files using a file picker. Excuse me. And she wants to send this particular document to her desktop on the low side of the cross-domain solution. So she does it OK, and what we see here is that the message, or the file, sorry, has been put into a queue, a pending queue, and that's because we've set up review and release, where one of a number of reviewers can now go and have a look at that document and make sure it's safe to release. So if I log into that same web application as Charlie, who's one of my reviewers, I can see here under upload review, in fact, you can see an alert down there as well, that there are some new items for upload review. And in this case, I can see it's from Alice. It's going to low, and it's this document here. So I can download that document and open it and do my review. As I'm doing that, Alice can see that it's now in progress and Charlie is the person reviewing it. So Charlie looks through the document and says, yeah, that looks fine to send out. Doesn't necessarily do a great job, but he's having a review. And then he can determine whether to let it go or not. If I decide not to let it go as a reviewer, then Alice finds out that the thing's been rejected and has to determine what to do next. If I do that again, and this time we'll get Charlie to accept it. So this time he's going to say, yes, it's okay. Then it pushes it through the cross-domain solution. And then the cross-domain solution does the automated checks and the threat removal. And in this case, again, you can see it's failed. And that's because actually Charlie didn't do a great job, and the document was marked as being sensitive, and therefore it's not allowed to go out through that channel. And we can do the same thing with email. So the same policy and the same cross-domain solution applies through email. So if Alice was to send that same message as an email out to, say, Bob on the low side, he sends that message. Again, it goes through the same threat removal process and goes through the same policy enforcement process with the same policies applied. And what we end up with is a non-delivery report this time, saying that the message couldn't be sent because it was company sensitive. So the same policy gets applied whether it's files or whether it's emails. And in this case, also our security administrator has a notification that the message has been blocked and the reason why. So the policy enforcement there, making sure that we're not sending out stuff that we shouldn't do to the wrong people. If Alice wanted to be a bit more nefarious and actually leak out some information, then she might consider just sending out some for example, some credit card details. So she's got a file of credit card details she wants to send out. And if she just sends that in a message to her low side account, which is Bob, then again, we would expect the policy enforcement engine to spot those credit card details because it's got a rule set up to look for that sort of thing using regular expressions. And what we see is that the security officer has been notified that message has been blocked because it contains some credit card details, and he can see who it's come from, who it was going to, and the content of the message. In this case, we've set the rules because it's slightly more sensitive. We've set the rule not to tell Alice that the message didn't get through. So we're just blindly discarding it and telling the security administrator, not informing Alice that her credit cards didn't get through to the outside. But I guess at some point she's going to spot that they didn't get through to the low side. So you can see here the message hasn't got through to the low side. So she might try something a bit more complicated. She knows that DLP tools and policy enforcement can't necessarily spot all types of hidden data, and therefore instead she's going to try and send the data out as an image. So she's going to send an image of 2 cats, and if we look at the cats, it looks perfectly normal. But if we open the file, just in a notepad, you can see that we've added some extra information inside this file. So as well as the JPEG information, we've got all this extra information, but it's still a valid JPEG file. So a lot of the defenses that look at this are going to look for a JPEG, say, is it a valid JPEG? Yes, it is, and therefore it gets let out. So if Alice sends that message to the low side, we'll see that again, it goes through the threat removal and it goes through the policy enforcement. And this time the policy enforcement isn't going to stop it because it is a valid JPEG. So we see that the picture of the cats do get through, and Alice has got her image to the outside, so we can save that to the desktop. Okay, and if she opens it, you can see the picture of the cats. That's great, but what she really wants is the credit card details. So if she opens it with Notepad, what we see now is that those credit card details have gone, and that's because it's been through the threat removal process. So the threat removal process has taken the information that's relevant to a JPEG and left everything else behind. And that means that what she's ended up with is a perfectly normal JPEG, but not the hidden data. So the system has been protected by doing the threat removal to remove any of that potential hidden data. Again, it didn't know it was there, but it has been able to remove it and make sure that what goes out is safe. But if we go back to the inside, because Alice had sent a bit of a warning message to start with and security had spotted that she was trying to send credit card details out, we can have added her to a watch list, which means we can use the policy enforcement engine to audit and journal everything that she's sending now. And so we can see here that if we do a search in the archives, we've actually got those messages, and we can go back and look at those and use them as evidence in the future if we need to. So again, this demonstration is about making sure you can export data safely and using both the policy enforcement and the threat removal controls together to do that. So with that, I think I'll hand you back to John and he can just give you a quick summary of where we're at.
Great stuff there, Tim. Thank you very much indeed. So couple of really neat demos there, I think. Just to wrap things up then, of course, people have attempted to build cross-domain solutions in all kinds of ways over the years, and generally it is possible to try and build your own, but it tends to be very complex, time-consuming, costly to do so. And the key point here really is that with Deep Secure's commercial off-the-shelf COTS technologies, policy enforcement, threat removal, what they enable you to do is implement the kinds of controls recommended in the NCSC patents for secure cross-domain solutions that effectively are built to protect against the threat and that can be independently verified as being able to do so. Okay, so I think it's probably time now we had a look at some questions. I see there's been one or two have come in from you guys as we've been talking. So let me just take a quick look at the question area here. Okay, so the first question that we have is from James. Thank you, James. And he says, how do we deal with macros and encrypted content passing between the domains? Tim, could you just say a word or two about that for us?
Yeah, of course. So certainly the purpose of threat removal is to make sure that when you're importing stuff, you're not importing anything that could be malicious. So macros are active content, they definitely could be malicious. And so the default position really is to stop any of that sort of active content coming in and removing it so that what you end up with is definitely safe. Now, we do know that in certain scenarios, certain users might need to use macros, and therefore that's where the policy enforcement comes in, really, to be able to selectively say, well, I'm just going to allow for this set of users from this person to this person or whatever the use of macros, but the majority don't excuse me, don't get it. And similarly with password protected content, you in order to do the threat removal process, we need to be able to parse and extract the business information, which if it's encrypted, we can't get to it, and therefore we can't necessarily make it safe. So again, it's about the majority not being able to import that sort of stuff and making exceptions based on specific users rather than allowing it for everybody.
So it's kind of just the granularity of your whitelisting, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, great, fantastic, good, James. Does that answer the question? Yeah, fantastic, good, excellent, excellent. The next question I have is from Ali, who's asking about, oh yeah, one of our slides depicts policy enforcement on both sides of the threat removal element. Tim, could you just explain why you might need to put them on both sides?
Yeah, so the key side, I guess, is on the inside, on the sensitive side, because that's where it is going to apply the policy, and those checks are then protected by the hardware enforced threat removal process. So definitely having it on the inside is key, really. That's where you want to be doing some of those additional controls, where you know that those checks are protected from attack. But equally, you might need to put some policy enforcement on the outside, and that's A, to stop stuff even hitting the threat removal in the first place, so you can apply policy early on for importing. B, you might want to be doing auditing and archiving of traffic from on the outside before it's been through the threat removal process. Potentially, that gives you an archive of the original content that was coming in. And so there's sort of a few reasons why you might want to put it on both sides. Typically, you will have it on the inside, but you may want to add it onto the outside as well.
Okay, so it's kind of scenario specific in a way.
Yeah, definitely.
Good stuff. Okay, thank you. That's marvelous. And finally, one question here from Martin. Just make sure I've read this right. Okay, so if you can't find the secret hidden in the image with the naked eye, and the automatic tool can't find it, he's referring to the credit card example here, I think, and the automatic tool can't find it, how do you know the secret's there?
Yeah, good question. And actually, when we looked at the image file, you could see that there were credit card details there. So you would expect some tools could actually find those credit card details, even though it's an image file. They could, just by scanning it for text, could actually find that there are credit card details there. But there are even better ways of hiding information in images, which I didn't show here, where it just uses the pixels to hide the data in each pixel. And that's impossible to tell from just analysis. And so there are definitely ways of hiding data where you can't spot it. And the key here is that we're not trying to spot it. So the threat removal process isn't looking for hidden data. It's just what it's doing is saying, I want to take the information, the business information, and leaving everything else behind. And so it just happens to leave behind all of that extra data that you don't want when it takes the business information. So it's just the way it works means it just gets left behind without knowing it's there.
Right. Okay. Martin, does that answer the question? Perfectly, apparently. Good. Thank you, Martin. Good, great stuff. Okay, so before we go, there's a couple of bits of additional information. So you can get more information on safely exchanging information between untrusted and trusted domains if you look at the attachments to your webinar invite. So attached is our briefing paper on the UK NCSC guidance and how we enable organisations to implement that guidance in a practical way. We've also attached a couple of case studies showing how we've helped other organisations achieve their goals for safe cross-domain information exchange. And again, attached is a PDF of the slides of this presentation. Now, you can always contact us directly by reaching out to any member of the team, and specifically anyone from our business development team. I believe we've got a member of the team online today with us. Jordan, would you like to just say a quick hello?
Morning, everybody. Can everybody see me on camera just now? There we go. Hi. Thanks for the intro, John. Yeah, so I'm Jordan Marriott. I'm a member of the Deep Secure Business Development team. Well, first of all, thank you all for attending today. I know that John and Tim have worked really hard on keeping it concise and and obviously informative. So I hope you found it interesting. Once again, thanks for coming. And yeah, I just wanted to introduce myself, show my face, and connect if possible. So obviously, if you have any questions off the back of this webinar, then please get in touch with you and myself or my colleagues, Josh and Ryan, whose details are also up on the screen there. And we'd love to set in some time to have a chat. And answer any questions you might have, or obviously point you in the direction of someone in our company that would be better suited to answering whatever it is you'd like to ask. So yeah, thanks again for your time, everyone, as we go into lockdown 2.0. Obviously, I hope you will take care of yourselves, and hopefully we'll hear from you again soon. So take care, and thanks again.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you, Jordan. It remains for all of us here on the Deep Secure team call this morning to say thanks for attending. Hope you enjoyed it, and cheerio for now. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.